He had worn the uniform of his country for 3 decades. He had led soldiers through war zones, carried medals on his chest, and carried scars no one could see. But none of that mattered the moment one officer looked at his skin before his face. On a quiet roadside, a man who had given his life to serve was treated like a criminal. Handcuffed, humiliated, stripped of dignity in front of strangers with cameras. What that officer didn't know, one phone call could shake the system she thought she controlled. This is the story of justice, delayed but undeniable. Before we dive in, hit that like button and subscribe so more stories like this reach people who need to hear them. Major General David Rowland had driven that stretch of road in rural Mississippi countless times. A quiet 2-lane highway lined with pine trees and broken fences, where the air smelled of dust and diesel. It wasn't a battlefield, but David always carried himself as though he was on duty. 35 years in uniform made that a habit. That afternoon, he wasn't in his dress blues. No ribbons, no stars, just an old jacket and jeans. His rank stayed folded neatly in the back seat, stitched into a coat that only his soldiers would recognize. To anyone passing by, he was just another middle-aged black man driving an old sedan. When his GPS froze, he pulled over near a gravel patch, thinking nothing of it. Just a short pause, a minute to reset the route before heading back toward the base, but the peace broke quickly. Flashing lights, a patrol car pulling in behind him, a deputy he didn't know, walking fast, hand already near her holster. No greeting, no explanation, no calm request for license and registration, instead a demand, an order to step out, a tone that carried not caution but assumption. David was no stranger to tension. He had been stared down in foreign lands, challenged in briefing rooms where lives hung on his judgment. But this was different. This wasn't a foreign threat. This was home. He tried to explain, calmly, that he had only stopped to fix his GPS. But the deputy's eyes weren't listening. Her words were sharp, laced with suspicion, and within minutes, what should have been a harmless roadside pause turned into an encounter that would spiral far beyond her control. David stepped out slowly, his palms open, posture calm. He had learned long ago that the less sudden you looked, the safer you were. The deputy circled him like a suspect. "Hands on the hood," she barked. He frowned gently. "Ma'am, with respect, I've done nothing wrong. My identification is in the car. I'm a federal officer. Allow me to—" Hands on the hood. No hesitation. No listening. Her hand pressed firmly against her sidearm. The signal was clear. This wasn't a request. David complied. His palms flattened against the warm metal of his sedan. The deputy yanked at his arm, spread his legs apart, and demanded to know where he was headed. David gave a calm, precise answer. She didn't believe him. She radioed in vague words. Suspicious male. Possible threat. That phrase stung. Suspicious. Threat. Words that had been weaponized against men like him for centuries. He breathed steady, steady like he'd done under fire overseas. "Ma'am, please check my credentials. My name is Major General David Rowland. My identification is inside that briefcase." "I am not armed," the deputy scoffed. "General, out here? You expect me to buy that?" The truth was inches away, stitched into the jacket on his back seat, hidden in the ID he wasn't allowed to touch. But the deputy didn't care. She was no longer following procedure. She was asserting control. "Turn around," she ordered. Her voice shook, not with fear but with adrenaline. "You're being detained." He shook his head softly. "I've cooperated fully." "You are escalating without cause." She grabbed his wrist, twisting it behind him. The cuffs clicked shut, biting into his skin. The humiliation wasn't just physical, it was symbolic. A man who had commanded battalions, who had carried the weight of his country's flag into hostile lands, was now bent over the hood like a common criminal. He didn't resist. He didn't shout. He only whispered, "This will not end the way you think." The deputy shoved him toward the back seat of her cruiser. Inside the squad car, David sat straight despite the cuffs. His eyes scanned the roadside, families, strangers, phones lifted high. He knew what that meant: evidence, witnesses, truth, and then he remembered one call. One call to the right person, and the weight of the truth would come crashing down on this quiet highway. But he didn't reach for anger. He reached for patience. Because sometimes the strongest weapon wasn't force, it was restraint. The deputy had no idea who she had locked in the back of her car. She thought she had won. She thought she had silenced him. But what she had done was ignite a storm that was already beginning to gather. Right there, on the edge of that Mississippi road, the deputy drove with a smirk, convinced she had subdued another threat. But in the back seat, David sat calm. Not broken, not defeated. At the station, the cuffs stayed tight as they walked him past rows of desks. Officers glanced up, puzzled. Something about this man didn't fit the label written on the arrest sheet. The deputy dumped his briefcase on the counter. "Claims he's some kind of general," she mocked. The desk sergeant raised an eyebrow. "General?" His hand moved toward the case. "Let's see those credentials." The deputy rolled her eyes. Probably fake. The case opened. Inside lay a crisp military ID embossed with authority. Beside it, a folder stamped classified, and then a row of medals, glinting proof of decades of service. The room went silent. The sergeant's jaw tightened. He turned slowly toward the deputy. "Do you have any idea who you just cuffed?" Her face drained of color. He didn't identify properly. He did. And you ignored him." The sound of boots echoed across the floor. Two senior officers approached, whispering urgently into radios. Within minutes, phones rang, screens lit up, and the small-town station turned into a hive of panic. The call had already been made. A single message, passed from David's contacts, had reached the Pentagon. And the Pentagon did not take lightly to a decorated general being paraded like a criminal. The deputy's confidence cracked. Her voice trembled as she tried to justify herself. "He looked suspicious. I followed protocol." But protocol had been shattered the moment bias replaced judgment. David finally spoke, his voice steady, every word heavy with truth. "You see a threat when you should have seen a citizen. You see color when you should have seen character. And now you will answer for it." The sergeant nodded grimly. "Uncuff him. Now." As the metal restraints fell away, the weight shifted. The deputy stood frozen, realizing her badge could not shield her from accountability. The deputy was removed from duty pending investigation. For days, the video of her roadside arrest circled across social media. Millions watched, outraged. Millions more recognized something painfully familiar. The ease with which power had been abused against a man whose only crime was the color of his skin. David never raised his voice. He never resisted. His strength was in his patience, in letting the truth speak louder than his anger. That truth embarrassed not just one deputy, but an entire system that too often fails to see dignity before suspicion. And yet this was more than the humiliation of one man. It was a mirror for a society that still struggles to match its ideals with its reality. How many men and women without David's rank, without his medals, without his connections, have faced the same treatment, but with no cameras, no witnesses, no one to call? The question lingers. If this can happen to a general, what happens to the ordinary? That is why telling this story matters. Because injustice thrives in silence. Because humiliation, unchecked, becomes a pattern. And because dignity is not a privilege, it is a right. David's quiet resilience left us with a lesson. True power is not in the ability to punish, but in the strength to endure, expose, and demand change. As you reflect on this story, ask yourself how many more uniforms, titles, and sacrifices must be ignored before equality is not just a word but a reality? The injustice David endured should not just anger us. It should move us to see, to speak, to demand a world where no one is reduced to a threat simply for existing. Because silence protects the abuser, but truth once spoken can never be handcuffed. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. By liking this video, sharing it, and subscribing to this channel, you help bring these hidden injustices into the light. Together, we can make sure these stories are not forgotten, and that silence